Welcome, history enthusiasts, to a journey through the glittering halls and shadowy corners of royal courts across the world. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating lives of court entertainers, those remarkable individuals who wielded lutes and laughter, juggled knives and secrets, and somehow managed to survive in the most dangerous workplace imaginable, right next to the throne. These weren't just musicians or comedians. They were spies, philosophers, acrobats, and sometimes the only people brave enough to tell a king the truth. This is The Story of Us by Skoob, with yours truly, Madison Reed. Settle in as we explore the extraordinary world of minstrels, jesters, and the entertainers who shaped history from behind a mask of merriment. Let's begin our story in the vibrant atmosphere of medieval European courts, where the line between entertainer and servant was beautifully blurred. The term ministre, or minstrel, derived from Latin, originally referred to performers with an astonishing array of talents. These weren't one-trick ponies, my friends. A successful minstrel needed to master music and singing, certainly, but that was just the beginning. Imagine a single performer who could recite epic tales that lasted for hours, then shift seamlessly into jesting and juggling, follow that with breathtaking acrobatics, and cap off the evening with a puppet show. Some even threw in magic tricks, archery demonstrations, and knife throwing for good measure. One particularly skilled performer earned the delightful nickname Matilda Makejoy. And honestly, what a perfect name for someone whose entire job was to create joy. Now here's where it gets really interesting. According to the scholar Southworth, the word menestrel didn't originally mean someone who exclusively performed. It simply denoted a minor court servant. The roles within courts were remarkably fluid. Picture this. The wayfarer, essentially the royal confectioner, could easily transform into a post-meal entertainer. One moment you're serving sweets, the next, you're performing a comedic routine. Talk about job flexibility. Within these royal households, minstrels lived relatively stable lives compared to their wandering counterparts. They honed their craft at specialized schools of minstrelsy that convened annually during Lent. Their talents were often described as harping and carping, a wonderful phrase that captured both musical ability and witty speech. Many excelled at instruments like the lute or rebec, and their performances frequently incorporated acrobatics, storytelling, or acts with trained animals. The atmosphere these entertainers created was dynamic and engaging, filled with catchphrases used in jest. Things like, "Sir, what say ye with your fat face?" alongside mimicry, quick insults, and a vibrant mix of songs and dance tunes. The distinction between minstrels and fools was sometimes beautifully blurred, creating an entertainment landscape rich with variety and surprise. But let's talk about something that might surprise you. In noble households, musical prowess wasn't just appreciated, it was practically essential. We have a fascinating document compiled by William Perpoint that listed the household employees of the Marquis of Exeter, and it reads like a musical talent catalog. Perpoint himself was described as age 20, unmarried, goodly stature, can play well upon sundry instruments. Anne Brown was noted as not married, good with the needle, and can play well upon the virginals and lute. William Booth could sing properly in three-man songs, while Thomas Wright, at 38 years old, possessed talents in playing well with a harp, singing, juggling, and other proper conceits and making pastimes. The list went on to mention a musician proficient with 4 or 5 instruments. And here's my favorite entry. Someone who, despite playing only indifferently himself, was absolutely brilliant at teaching others. He could instruct what he couldn't personally perform, an early music educator, if you will. This obsession with musical talent extended to the very top. There's even a curious transaction from 1516, where King Henry VIII paid a stranger £40 for a child. While we can't be certain, historians have speculated these children were acquired specifically for their potential musical abilities. It seems the court was always on the hunt for fresh talent. Now, let me tell you about one of the most intriguing figures from Henry VIII's court. Hans Nagel, a minstrel who led an extraordinary double life. By day, Nagel entertained the court with his music, charming the king and courtiers with his performances. But behind the scenes, this talented musician was actually a spy. Nagel operated as a courier for Richard de la Pole, a claimant to the English throne who was based in France. His role in this covert network was crucial. He delivered messages between de la Pole's supporters in England and Scotland and gathered intelligence on the inner workings of the English court and government. Here's the twist. The English knew about his dual allegiance. They knew he was a spy, yet they allowed him to continue his clandestine missions without interference. Why? Because they were monitoring him, of course. De la Pole was rumored to be amassing a force of 15,000 German mercenaries, financed by Francis I, for a potential invasion of England. Other intelligence suggested he might be sent to Scotland to instigate a rebellion, or that the French might attempt to regain Tournai. Throughout the winter of 1516, Nagel continued to entertain King Henry and his courtiers, completely unaware that the king's savvy ministers were strategically capitalizing on his undercover activities. It's a perfect example of the complex web of politics and performance that characterized court life, where a song could mask a secret and entertainment could serve espionage. Let's shift our focus now to the jesters themselves and how they evolved from earlier entertainment traditions. The 13th century scholar Thomas Chobham described joculatores as entertainers who sang about the deeds of princes and the lives of saints, providing comfort to people who were sick or troubled. Over time, in England, this term evolved into the rather grandiose title for court jesters, Domini Regis Joculator, literally the king's jester. This role carried a humorous touch that persists in modern words like jocular and joke. The French had their jongleurs, who shared many similarities with the joculatores and Italian Minstreli. These performers specialized in heroic tales called chansons de geste, short satirical narratives known as fabliaux, and stories of saints' lives. Though usually regarded as lower-tier roaming entertainers, more commonly found in market squares than royal courts, some jongleurs did achieve court performances. Not all were second-rate either. Some were of noble birth and even served in battles. Take Taillefer, for example, who played a crucial role at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, motivating soldiers with stories of Charlemagne and Roland before the fighting began. By the 14th century, there was a clear trend toward greater specialization. Minstrels began diverging from jesters, though it remained common for a jester to possess a wide range of talents. This specialization had actually appeared much earlier in China, during the late spring and autumn period, when formal aspects of performing, music, singing, and dancing, were increasingly assumed by specialists separate from jesters. The European jester evolved from this rich tapestry of traditions, inheriting roles from both the bardic traditions of the North and the Southern mime, and actors who roamed the Roman Empire. During the medieval period, terminology varied, growing from broader descriptors like fool to more specific titles that emerged from the 16th century onwards. Let me take you now to Russia, where a similar constellation of talents existed among the Skomoroki. These remarkable entertainers included court jesters, who were also magicians, animal trainers, and puppeteers. They were part of a vibrant subculture that traced its lineage from Byzantine mime performers and Spielmänner who traveled from Europe during the 10th or 11th century. Initially, the Skomoroki were wandering entertainers, but many eventually found patronage in nobles' homes. Tsar Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, was the first Russian ruler to keep them at his court. The court jesters among them, known as spielmen, were beloved for their unrestrained mockery of religious and political institutions. Imagine having the audacity to mock the church and state in front of the Tsar himself. The golden age of these jesters coincided with that of their European counterparts, spanning from the 15th to the 17th century. However, their prominence tragically waned after 1649 due to imperial edicts and church persecution that effectively stifled their profession. It's a reminder that even laughter could be dangerous when it challenged power too directly. But the story of court entertainment goes back much, much further than medieval Europe or Imperial Russia. Let's travel to ancient Egypt during the 6th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, around 2323 to 2150 BC. Here we find what might be the earliest documented court fool, the dancing dwarf. Harkuf, an official serving under the boy pharaoh Neferkare, also known as Pepi II, documented the discovery of a dancing dwarf during an expedition to a remote region south of Egypt. What makes this truly special is that we have Neferkare's actual written response, preserved through millennia. The young pharaoh wrote, "Thou hast said in this thy letter that thou hast brought a dancing dwarf from the land of spirits, like the dwarf which the treasurer of the god Birded brought from Punt in the time of Asisi. Come northward to the court immediately. Thou shalt bring this dwarf with thee, for the dances of the god, to rejoice and gladden the heart of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Neferkare, who lives forever." That phrase, "to rejoice and gladden the heart of the king," captures the timeless essence of the court fool's purpose. Whether in ancient Egypt or medieval Europe, whether in China or Persia, the fundamental job remained the same: to entertain, refresh, and comfort the sovereign. This function persisted across different cultures and epochs, making the court fool a truly universal figure in human civilization. This historical precedence establishes what scholars call the dwarf fool as a category that predates the later classifications of natural fools and artificial fools. The dwarf fool holds a special place in history, representing the ancient roots of a tradition that would flourish for thousands of years. Now let's explore the deep connection between jesters and music, which spans cultures and continents. Music has always been a cornerstone of the jester's art, providing a rich source of talent and creativity worldwide. In Uganda, at the dawn of the 20th century, a jester's identity was inseparable from music. One account highlights the jester's unique singing style. The tomfool, for Uganda, like the old European monarchies, always keeps a jester, was made to sing in the gruff, hoarse, unnatural voice which he ever affects to maintain his character. This emphasizes the traditional role of jesters as both musicians and entertainers in a global context. Let's journey to Persia, where we meet Abu Bakr-e-Rababi, recognized as the Rebec player. He was referred to as the director of court singers under Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna in the late 10th century, though some evidence suggests he might have lived a century earlier. The semi-mythical jesters Nasruddin and Birbal were similarly endowed with musical prowess. Nasruddin was known for playing the theorbo, a large lute, at the behest of Tamerlane, while Birbal was lauded for his dual talents as a musician and witty storyteller. In Chinese courts, the connection between music and jesting ran particularly deep. The term changyu specifically describes a jester with notable musical talents. The great historian Sima Qian recounts the story of the dwarf jester Twisty Pole, known as Yu Zhan, during the Qin dynasty, referring to him as a Chang. Jester Meng from the same era was characterized as a yueren, meaning music man. The term Linglun, originally attributed to the ancient Chinese deity of music and master to the Yellow Emperor, eventually came to be associated with court jesters as well. Numerous jesters' names hint at their musical roots. For instance, someone called gradually stretching taller, Shen Jiangaoch in Chinese, likely combined roles as both musician and jester. One epitaph for a musician highlights his character and musical aptitude before noting his unmatched jesting skills. Chinese jesters commonly emerged from bands of existing court entertainers, particularly musicians. Many classical jester routines were linked to institutions like the Pear Orchard, or Li Yuan, and the Court Entertainments Bureau, known as Jiaofang. Both were established by Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang Dynasty, who was revered as a patron god of Chinese theater. Even after the Pear Orchard ceased to exist, It had been instrumental in cultivating countless musicians, acrobats, and performers, including jesters who were often affiliated with the music ministry, or Uebu. There's a wonderful compendium called the Uefu Zalu, the miscellaneous notes on the music bureau, that contains an entire section dedicated to jesters and their short, ironic skits. Among its pages stands out a jester named Huang Fanchuo, known in English as In Full Streamer Huang, celebrated for his musical brilliance. When asked about musical notations for clappers, which had previously been unwritten, Huang cleverly drew ears on paper, remarking, "If you have ears to hear, you won't lose the rhythm. Talk about thinking outside the box." The Tang Dynasty text called the Ji Drum Record recounts another fascinating story about Huang's abilities. He could apparently read Emperor Xuanzong's moods through music alone. On one occasion, after being summoned, Huang delayed his entrance until the melody shifted. When the emperor asked how a mere servant could discern his feelings through song, Huang responded with tactful wit, bowed, and received forgiveness from the amused emperor. It was a perfect demonstration of his prowess in both humor and music. Back in Europe, the musical elements of jesterdom were deeply intertwined with the traditions of poet-singers, such as bards, skalds, and troubadours. The German jester poet Friedrich Taubmann was renowned for his skill on the lute, earning him the title of a second Orpheus from a bishop and his chaplains. In true jesting fashion, Taubmann humorously responded to the comparison by noting that, like Orpheus, he too was frequently accompanied by a crowd of Roman beasts, a cheeky reference to his less than refined audiences. Literature captured these musical jesters as well. The 17th century novel by Hans Jakob Grimmelshausen featured the fictional character Simplicius Simplicissimus, a jester trained in playing the lute. Then there's the real-life Italian musician Pietro Mira, known as Pedrillo, who brought levity to his violin performances at the Russian court of Empress Anna Ivanovna through amusing facial expressions and theatrical antics, thereby earning himself the position of court jester. Even as entertainment roles evolved and the distinction between jesters and musicians became clearer, many jesters retained considerable musical abilities. The jester's art was in many ways inseparable from the musical traditions of their time. Let's return to Henry VIII's court for a moment to understand how entertainment reached its apex in elaborate ceremonies. The intricate and well-orchestrated ceremonies of the court were imbued with fantasy and pageantry, finding their highest expression in mummeries or disguisings, also referred to as masks. In these spectacular events, courtiers often became both audience and participants, assuming idealized roles. Even kings like Henry himself were known to join in the role-playing, blurring the lines between reality and performance. It was theater on the grandest scale, where everyone had a part to play, and the boundary between the stage and real life dissolved completely. Now let's consider why humor mattered so much in these royal courts. Humor has been regarded as one of the most profound forms of thought and perception, intrinsic to human nature. It's considered essential for easing tensions and offering fresh perspective. Historically, one of the most critical environments for humor was the royal court, the epicenter of political power. Court jesters played the crucial role of bringing humor to those often solemn surroundings, tasked with lightening the atmosphere for the rulers they served. Think about it. These were places of immense pressure, where decisions affected entire nations, where one wrong move could mean war or ruin. The jester provided release, a moment of levity, a chance to see things from a different angle. As political power structures evolved and the monarchy's grip on authority loosened, the presence and influence of jesters diminished, leading them to seek opportunities in various other domains. Although their spontaneous and personal style of humor, which once enlivened the king's court, is difficult to replicate today, these jesters deserve recognition for their contributions. Despite often being overlooked or forgotten, their legacy warrants preservation and re-examination. Scholars have elaborated on the classification of jesters, distinguishing between two primary types. First, there were the natural fools, who were inherently humorous due to their simplicity, or what was termed witlessness. Then there were the artificial or clever fools, who mastered the art of humor through skill and talent. However, as we've already explored, there exists a third, more elusive category: the dwarf fool, which claims historical precedence due to its long-standing presence, especially evident in ancient records like those from Egypt. Despite sharing common ground with musicians, actors, and other entertainers, court jesters distinguished themselves by forming close and personal bonds with powerful figures like kings or emperors. They enjoyed greater freedom of speech and had direct access to the court's highest echelons thanks to their humor, candor, and sometimes their physical attributes or peculiar skills. So what did it take to become a court jester? You needed a sharp wit, certainly, a collection of jokes and stories that would never grow stale, abundant humor that could adapt to any situation, and physical prowess or a quirky characteristic to catch the monarch's favor and secure lifelong employment. It was a precarious position, requiring you to entertain without offending, to speak truth without triggering rage, to be both fool and philosopher. But here's something fascinating. The relationship between kings and their jesters often sparked intense envy among other courtiers. Throughout history and across various cultures, jesters held positions of unique influence that resulted in resentment and jealousy from others at court. Take Andare, Sri Lanka's legendary court jester, who enjoyed a level of influence and freedom both within and outside the palace that inspired envy among other courtiers. These courtiers once tried to make a fool out of him, but he cleverly countered their efforts, proving his wit and maintaining his esteemed position. In Persia, the poet Obaid Zakhani expressed serious discontent over the preferential treatment shown to jesters by the king. As documented in the 1487 work Biographies of the Poets, Obaid was upset that his treatise on rhetoric, dedicated to Shah Abu Ishaq, was completely ignored because the king was preoccupied with his jester. This incident led Obaid to question why the company of jesters, known for their jesting and ribaldry, was favored over men of knowledge and talent. It's a complaint that probably resonated with many learned individuals throughout history. The Italian poet Ariosto similarly bemoaned how jesters seemed more welcome than the virtuous and wise at royal courts. He expressed his disdain that jesters were more favored than people of virtue, writing, "Più grati assai, che il virtuoso e il buono." Several writers noted that jesters had risen to such esteem that the tables of nobles were more crowded with jesters than with any virtuous individuals. Imagine being a serious scholar or accomplished warrior, only to watch a comedian receive more attention and favor from your king. But life wasn't all privilege and influence, especially for natural fools. In European courts, these individuals frequently faced persecution and ill treatment from courtiers and pages. Let me tell you about Caillet, a natural fool serving Louis XI of France, who was once subjected to a cruel prank where pages nailed his ear to a piece of wood. Yes, you heard that right. They literally nailed his ear to wood. Although a courtier eventually released him and tried to identify the culprits, Caillet's response shows his particular brand of humor. When suspects were questioned, he humorously ended up denying it was any of the pages, exclaiming, "I wasn't there either," even though he himself hadn't been accused yet. It's a poignant moment that shows both the cruelty these individuals faced and the resilience they maintained. Triboulet, another French jester, experienced similar mistreatment from pages, which became so serious that the king personally rescued him. The king offered to punish those responsible, but Triboulet requested their forgiveness instead. A remarkable act of mercy from someone who had just been abused. To protect these vulnerable natural fools, kings sometimes assigned them guardians. This wasn't merely to prevent mistreatment, but to ensure their overall welfare. In Spain, Philip II showed great affection for Murata, a natural fool, and provided him with a guardian, as did most others at court. The guardianship arrangements often distinguished between guardians and valets, with the former responsible for the natural fool's well-being, and the latter more akin to a personal assistant. In France, such distinctions were particularly clear, as revealed in expense records from the Valois court. A guardian named Jehanneau le Bourguignon was reimbursed for his dual role in caring for Nicolas the Fool. King Louis XII of France assigned a guardian, Michel le Vernois, to care for Triboulet, and records mention another guardian appointed in 1523 to look after him. This guardian, François Boursier, received funds not only for his own wages, but also for cleaning, maintenance of clothing, and accommodation for Triboulet. These weren't token gestures. They represented real investment in the care and protection of these individuals. And that wraps up our journey through the hidden world of royal court entertainers, not just jesters, but spies, artists, philosophers, and fearless truth-tellers. Far from mere amusement, they shaped politics, crossed borders with music and laughter, and brought humanity into the halls of power. But here's the twist. Some of these performers may have changed the course of history more than the kings they served. Curious how? Download the Skoob app now to unlock the full story and uncover the secrets they left behind.